Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Martha Alter Hines, and I am here about to have a conversation that I'm really looking forward to with Daniel Sowelu. So Daniel and I spoke one other time formally on a video where we talked about the Shiva Shakti Asteroids with regard to relationship and love and the divine feminine, divine masculine, and that video was wonderful. That interview was wonderful. That conversation was really eye-opening and life-changing, actually, for me personally, and I know a lot of other people really enjoyed it. So because that conversation was so powerful and moving, Daniel and I actually are going to be co-hosting a workshop coming up on September 30th or October 1st, depending on where in the world you are. And we'll talk more about that workshop toward the end of this video. But what we wanted to do in this conversation is to dive in a little more deeply into what these Shiva Shakti asteroids are, and then have a conversation about how they are relevant and helpful and powerful and healing, the kind of the effects they have, what effect it has for us to incorporate these asteroids into our work with the cosmos and with ourselves and life. And we have some really, really fascinating things we're going to be talking about. So I'm super excited about it. And thank you, Daniel, so much for being here.
Oh, me too. We had such a great time last time. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. Pleasure to be able to talk about such juicy material.
Definitely. So let me read your bio briefly here before we officially dive into the conversation so people know who you are. And certainly go back and watch that other video. I will link the other video with this video so you can get the best of all of it. But Daniel Sowelu is a therapeutic and experiential astrologer, primal therapist, teacher and trainer, and sacred tour leader in his 40th year of practice. He is the director of the Australian Institute of Primal Astrology, a vehicle for his 20 years of running professional trainings in experiential and therapeutic astrology. His spiritual and professional life has been deeply informed by lifelong practices in the Shiva Shakti Kundalini traditions of India, where he leads yearly goddess and sacred marriage tours. And I know you're going to India actually over the eclipses coming in October. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, which will be very interesting, I can tell you.
Yes, definitely, especially given how powerful these eclipses are. Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, ever since we spoke, I have started incorporating especially the Shiva asteroid in my own approach to astrology. And because that one happens to be included in AstroGold, which is the program that I use. And people can look up all these other asteroids on astro.com, but it's a little clunkier. So it's not as easeful for me to incorporate them. But as we're about to talk about, wow, they are playing powerful roles now and coming up in various ways. And so maybe I would love to start with the question of, how do you personally and professionally tend to conceive of these asteroids in general, specifically the Shiva Shakti asteroids, and how do you approach them in your own life and in your work with clients? How do you incorporate them, especially when you're looking at transits and you're looking at upcoming astrological events? What is that relationship like for you?
Yeah, there's lots of layers to that. Certainly, because I'm, in many ways, I'm also an evolutionary astrologer, and the Shiva Shakti archetypes are enormously influential for those who have that really kind of committed spiritual life. And particularly when they line up. For instance, like the recent retrograde Venus conjunct Black Moon squaring Uranus. It's like, as we've spoken about, I see the Black Moon as representing Durga, the great mother of India who births all the other goddesses. So, we've only got to think about the last few weeks to see, to have a visceral experience of how intense the processes that were activated, particularly by the Black Moon. And that level of Shakti that she represents inside our bodies was the reason why it was so intense psychologically and spiritually for many people, because she specializes in dredging up what's in the way of us having a more complete experience of our authentic selves, but also a complete, a closer experience of feeling ourselves more in unity with the Great Mother, with the cosmos. So all those things have been on offer really strongly these last few weeks. So that's one element of it. And certainly when, Kali visits, it's like, we can expect some action. Both light and dark whenever they appear. And one important thing about these, particularly the so-called dark goddesses, whatever culture, there's been too much an emphasis on their destructive components and not enough about what lies underneath these fierce warrior goddesses that are all about cutting away the bullshit and our ego structures that keep us limited. Because underneath those fierce, scary faces are layers of incredible love and beauty and who contribute to incredibly deep feelings of safety within ourselves. When a Shakti goddess lines up in a chart, then you know that there are opportunities for stretching spiritually, for stretching in our psychological processes, because they do operate so deeply, and for stretching in our hearts, in our heart availability to ourselves and to our significant others. So, whether it's Hygeia, whether it's Kali, and particularly Parvati, like when the Parvati asteroid visits our chart, she's always going to try and give us a glimpse of the sacred marriage. Even if it's only, a fraction of a second. It's like she will show us what's possible. And like her sisters, if you like, Kali, Lalita, etc., she will also show up what's in the way of us stepping into that, into a greater openness, whether that Shiva Shakti relationship's happening in ourselves, how it's playing out in our relationships. So that's another layer of them. As an experiential astrologer, knowing what these archetypes are up to supports me to be able to create processes so people can actively work with what's on offer, both in terms of purificatory processes and, psychospiritual openings. That's really important to me because when I'm creating experientialist workshops, I will always do it on the basis of what's happening astrologically at a particular time. For instance, the whole process from Mars evolving towards Shiva. I've created like a 10-week program specifically for men, where we start with the raw material of Mars, and then we step through the different stages, Eros, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, outer planets, Shiva.
Wow.
And you can imagine how powerful that is, working experientially, therapeutically, and spiritually. And it's the same with the Shakti goddesses. So you can create some incredibly juicy events.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing is that, like, a lot of my clientele here in Australia, at least, are very involved in, whether it's, conscious sexuality, relationship evolution, and Tantra. And virtually all the Shakti goddesses are tantric goddesses. And even even in the West, like Lilith is a tantric goddess, Medusa is a tantric goddess. When you get underneath those scary faces. So when they show up, it's like then we have opportunities of, at the very least, of experiencing more of that pure, sacred aspect of our sexuality in our own bodies, whether it's internally and or in our relating with our loved ones. So for all those reasons, when they show up for me, there's kind of like a neon light in all those processes. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Just as a side note, how would you define tantric? Just for people who are listening and.
Well, see, as I was initiated into one of the authentic tantric traditions of India, which had very little to do with sexual expression originally, even though that's always been a bit of a spin-off. But the essence of Tantra is that Shiva Shakti, that uniting of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. Like my guru who initiated me, he used a Shiva mantra that was specifically energized to awaken the Shakti, to awaken the Kundalini. So right there and then, there's that Shiva Shakti component. And in that initiation, like it totally changed my life and gave me, however briefly, a total experience of being absolutely unified with the cosmos. And only lasted maybe 10 seconds, but everything altered. Yeah. So this is, and what I say about Tantra, because Tantra is kind of like a spiritual fashion now.
Right.
Yeah. And there's some great proponents of it, and there's also a lot of shadow, as we know. Yeah. But I say to people, like, Tantra, it's not so you do Tantra. Tantra already exists in us. It's more about whatever spiritual and or sexual practices open us up to that does pre-exist. And that's where, the transits of these Shakti goddesses comes in so importantly, because there's going to be an opening. We're going to get, however briefly or however fully, we will have some opportunity to experience that already exists inside us. And that's exciting.
Totally.
And even if you're not working with it spiritually, if you're watchful, you'll actually feel your body responding differently when you're sexually relating. Yeah. And an opportunity not just to dive into the Shakti, but to dive into deeper places of intimacy. Where the interface between healing, sexuality, spirituality just completely blossoms out. Yeah. Yeah, so that's my take on Tantra. And yeah, look, I think tantric practices are fabulous, and I'm grateful that they've come out into the world. Although, as I say to people, be very, very careful around who you choose to work with, because there's a lot of distortions, there's a lot of narcissism, there's a lot of sexual addiction.
Yeah.
And everybody's heard about different, tantric predators. So, which is really unfortunate, because it's brilliant work when it's done with integrity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So, in terms of the transits happening right now, and then kind of over the next 6 months, there is a particular set of transits that I'm especially drawn to next February, which we've talked about before we started recording. But I would love to start with, where would you like to start with these transits? Just to give some context of this next 6 months and how these Shiva Shakti asteroids, enhance our perception of what's happening.
For instance, the Kali asteroid is now just starting to conjunct the black moon. And just to clarify for everybody, when I say black moon, a lot of people mean by that talk about black moon Lilith. I've never been happy with calling the black moon just black moon Lilith. The black moon is much bigger than being an aspect of Lilith. In fact, in the tantric traditions, the black moon is related directly to Durga. And so the black moon is the great mother who has the many different faces, which includes Kali, includes Lalita, and includes Parvati. So when Kali joins the black moon, on one level, it's a mother-daughter reunion. Yeah. And in India, anyone who's done any Indian chanting, often Kali and Durga are included in the same chant. They are so close to each other. But mythologically, Durga births Kali when she needs to deal with thousands and thousands of warriors in battle. Demon warriors. And so there's a very close unity. So the two of them coming together means that there is an intensification of Shakti, and very deep Shakti, like in, Black Moon and Kali have so much to do with our bottom two chakras. The home of our sacred sexuality, but also the home of incredible distortions and disturbances, whether from our past life records, our ancestry. So when they come together, it means that the spiritual power of that period is intensified. So this is just starting now. It's peaking on the 30th of the month. August. So like the last few weeks, there'll be another round of intensity in our spiritual processes, in our psychological purificatory processes, but also with opportunities for awesome spiritual and or tantric openings.
When you're saying the 30th, you're saying August 30th, 2023.
Yeah.
For anybody who's watching in the
future.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's and that's at 26 degrees of Leo.
And do you use the true or the mean black moon? Or both, or
it depends. Because sometimes there's a rather big difference between them.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the oscillations of the moon being influenced by Jupiter. So it's kind of like, I tend to stick with the mean. on a day-to-day level, but also being watchful for, the other.
Cool. Yeah.
Nevertheless, and then the other one that's coming up is Shiva joins the black moon on the 14th of September. So that in itself is a major Shiva Shakti uniting union. And just to kind of give a bit of background for that, as people might be aware, when you look into the Shiva mythology, he's married to a whole bunch of different women. Well, female goddesses. He's married to Durga, he was married to Sati, he was married to Parvati, married to Lalita, and some people think, well, okay, he's polygamist. But the truth is, they are different faces of the one goddess.
And Sita.
Yeah.
Originally.
And well, no, Sita is the wife of Rama.
Oh, wait, who am I thinking of then?
Sati.
Sati, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Sati was his first wife, who self-immolated herself as a protest towards the patriarch.
And then Parvati was her reincarnation.
Yeah, it's what some people, that's how some people see it, as for sure. Yeah. So the fact that Shiva is the Shiva asteroid is lining up with the black moon is saying, well, that's a replication of the Shiva Durga marriage. And that's incredibly powerful. And so it's saying in the collective, there is a Shiva Shakti union happening. And that's happening inside each of us. And will impact us spiritually, psychologically, and sexually.
And so that must mean that also Shiva must be having a conjunction with Parvati at some point near-ish to now. Is that?
Yeah. I haven't specifically tracked that one, but when those two line up, then again, like that's the highest expression of the Shiva Shakti union. And whereas Shiva joining the black moon talks about more lower chakra work, Shiva joining Parvati is the whole journey upwards into the potential explosion of these two uniting in our crown chakras.
Right.
And so they're different layers. But what's important to say here is that some of these transits, how they're experienced is like any other transits. Different. Certain people will be incredibly open to this layer of experience, and so have some really strong things, particularly if they're doing intensive spiritual and or therapeutic processes. But for other people, it might be experienced as various disturbances within their own psyches or within their relationships, because there's layers of gunk which aren't allowing for that deeper experience.
Well, something I find really, really interesting looking at the recent transits and then coming up, 6 months from now, is that recently we had Mars and Venus almost conjunct in Leo, right? And then they didn't quite meet because Venus then went retrograde and Mars kept going into Virgo, where it is right now. And so it's like collectively we had this sense of the feminine and masculine coming so close, so close, like they were almost going to join, and then they didn't, right? And And over the next many weeks, Mars will be having if you think of it like this, it'll be conjunct the sun, so it'll be having its own quote unquote underworld journey. And then later in next February, Venus and Mars will actually they will actually meet in Aquarius. So close to opposite where they were about to meet in Leo, but they didn't quite. But then what you're saying is that in the meantime, so something I've been sitting with is, okay, so there has to be a purpose in the Venus and Mars not quite coming together, right? That in this time then, when the masculine and feminine in the sense of Mars and Venus are separate and are then eventually going to meet opposite pretty much where they almost met, there has to be an opportunity, some kind of deepening or some kind of growing that we can do before we actually meet as Mars and Venus in Aquarius.
Yeah.
February.
And you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
When Venus just turned and went retrograde, she had already crossed the black moon in the months before. And for various reasons, we must have needed a second round of that. Yeah, which happened, a couple of weeks ago. So that, and the black moon represents deep processes of purification. Like Andrew Harvey calls her action psychic chemotherapy, which is a really good way of describing often how it feels in our bodies. So Venus needed another round of purification within each of us. But as we're going towards the end of the month, the way she's retrograding, she and Jupiter are lining up.
Yeah. Squaring.
In a square, but a Venus-Jupiter square is hardly a tough aspect. But we're getting that because they're both going stationary. Instead of that being a few days, it's actually a number of weeks. So it's kind of like, okay, we have 2 weeks of really intense and disturbances because Venus and Black Moon also squared Uranus. So it's like both digging up ancient dirt to be released, but also with the Uranus like cracking open old relationship patterns, other Venus inside ourselves. And then the gift of that is this extended Venus-Jupiter as she's turning and going forward motion. So I think you're absolutely right. It's like there's some need for that in order for that conjunction in February to be potentially at least that much more complete, that much more potent.
Yeah. And I'll just throw in also recently what happened. One of these many transits that I can see also adding to what you're saying is that just a week ago-ish, Juno, the wife of Jupiter, right, was opposite Pluto, precisely squaring the nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yet another example.
Yeah, well, that repeats this process that we're in an ongoing process of relationship transformation, particularly our primary relationship, with Juno. And also I see Juno as being a carrier of the imprint of our parents' marriage.
Yes. And you and I talked about that in my chart. Yes, exactly. Yes. That's exactly how it feels in my personal chart. Yeah. Because I have Juno opposite Jupiter in my chart. And I would say the Jupiter-Juno dynamic didn't really play out in my own marriage or my own relationships, but it definitely played out very precisely, I would say, with my parents, right? So anyway, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, so with regard to this, I feel the 6 months as an opportunity, really, like I just said. And so what I think part of what you're adding to that sense of this being an opportunity is that although Venus and Mars didn't quite come together, what does come together between now and February is Shiva and Durga, and Shiva and Parvati, both, right? Both of those conjunctions happen soon in the next few weeks. So is there anything you feel called to say about how I mean, you've already kind of named that these conjunctions will potentially bring up things that need to be released, that are in the way of us having this union internally and or externally. But is there anything else that feels important about their role in this time?
Yeah. When we think about, like the long-term transit of Venus, so we're describing processes that are valid for over a 6-month period. What I've found is that, and even their mythology, in the mythology of Shiva, in the mythology of Kali, they and Durga all represent more powerful peak experiences against a backdrop of the longer term ones. Yeah. And because both Shiva and Kali are associated with often radical, sudden spiritual and or tantric awakenings.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and this is another reason why I keep an eye out for, when they're lining up or when they're joining another relationship orientated archetype. It's like there's this sense that there could be some depth charge, but also some spiritual lightning bolt.
Yeah. Well, and something, I mean, I would be really curious, I've been trying to just feel into Shiva in general. What is Shiva? Because I've been really called to it. Well, the North Node just transited my own natal Shiva, for example. Okay, so it's probably a big part of why. But as I've been trying to learn about Shiva and understand it, I mean, I'm not an expert in this in the slightest whatsoever, but what I understand about Shiva is that he is one of the 3 main gods of Hinduism, also Vishnu and Brahma, right, being the other 2. And Shiva is the great destroyer. And Shiva is, I've heard him talked about as the knower of how did the phrasing go? Something like the knower of the what does not exist, something along those lines. And so when I've heard the Shiva energy described, it really reminds me of my own experiences in my praying. Like when I go into my praying every day, I get taken out of the time-space continuum and into the void. And I'm associating the Shiva energy with that sense of like destruction, ultimate destruction, not as being violently bad, but destruction in the sense of when I go into that void space, what often I get shown and what I experience is that the whatever it is that I'm communicating with in that space, often when I say, okay, what I say in my prayers every day is, I am highest quantum source light, what is mine to do? And then I get shown whatever it is mine to do. And typically, more times than not, about 75% of the time, what I will get shown is I'll get taken out of the time-space continuum into the void, and I will get exploded into nothing. Which is really, really interesting, right? And but it's not that they're not saying they're not saying anything is bad. What they're saying is come back to the nothing of everything. So it's like the particles of me that have configured, the particles of existence that have configured as Martha need to be basically periodically, very on a regular basis, need to be exploded back into the particles of infinity, so that I can essentially reconfigure in whatever way that the divine needs me to manifest in each moment, right? Which is still Martha. It's not like I become a different person every day, but you kind of get what I'm saying. It's like, that's what I'm associating with this way I'm hearing Shiva described as the knower of the nothing and the destroyer. It's like, it reminds me of this sense of we have to go back to being shattered into nothing so we can remember, so we can come back to what's actually true, in a sense. Does that fit with your?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in some ways you've just described, this experience I had when I was 20.
Yes, I was wondering if it was similar. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And see that it's important to differentiate, like there's the cosmic Shiva.
Okay.
And then there's the Shiva archetype.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is important for our Hindu listeners, because some religious Hindus would get very upset if we say Kali or Shiva is an archetype. But a way of seeing it, the archetype is kind of like our inner Shiva temple, or our inner Kali temple, where we go, that isn't the whole story, but where we go to access, where we go to pray, where we go to, like you would visit a physical temple to tune in. Because from the point of view of the cosmic Shiva is consciousness itself.
Yes, that's how I feel it.
Inherent in everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's everything and no thing.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah.
And our capacity to open to those kind of exalted, very, very expanded states of consciousness.
Yeah.
And yeah, like in the years of Shiva meditations that I've done, I would periodically have those kind of experiences where even coming out of meditation, I would look around and just everything is shimmering conscious light.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a Shiva experience.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Cool.
But like his archetype is like extraordinary, because in some ways Shiva is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all incorporated, with elements of Jupiter and Saturn and Chiron.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so he's very complex. Like on one level, he is the perfect yogi. He's beyond it all. Yeah. And so there's that transcendent, unifying consciousness. As Sally Kempton said, he is ultimate blessing, because he opens us to that experience, that awareness. And yet on another level, he's profoundly embodied. He's a god of Tantra, of sacred masculine sexuality, which is why he's such an awesome role model for us men. In the evolution of our masculine, the evolution of our sexuality, of experiencing our sexuality as profoundly sacred and initiatory. So he's both totally out there, and on one hand, he's totally in the body.
Yes.
He's also an absolute effing wild man. He is untamable. He hangs out with ghosts and spirits and wild animals in his mythology. He's the ultimate dancer. because in that cycle, the Nataraj, the dancing Shiva, it describes his role in the cycles of life, like he's bringing things out of. He's both creating new worlds while destroying them.
Yes. Which is so, of course, related to many of these dark goddess energies as well.
Yes.
Could you compare, because I have, extremely personally, we've talked about before, very, very powerful dark goddess energies throughout my chart, everywhere, including Kali conjunct my Mars, including Parvati conjunct my Venus in Aries on my South Node in my 8th house. I mean, it's like, anyway, I could go on. Medusa conjunct, anyway, yeah. So I relate to this destroyer energy in lots of ways, but in the highest sense of it, right? So I would love, could you compare the Shiva nuance of it compared to the dark goddess? Yeah.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, because each of them, one of their roles is the destruction of naivety, of unconsciousness. Yeah. So they want to awaken us to an expanded state of consciousness, but it also wants to crack open those parts of ourselves that would prefer to stay numb, or prefer just to be seduced by, the dramas of life. Yeah. And part of the destructiveness of the dark goddesses is that, the whole destroying demons mythology associated with Durga and Kali. The demons are the demons of our conditioning, the demons of our ego structures that keep us separate both from our authentic self, but also from our sense of unity with life. So while there's a destructive component, it's about, chopping away what is not us.
Yes.
In our essence.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's also hard to discern the difference between what the dark goddesses and Shiva are up to is because Shiva, even though he is whole within himself, he is incomplete without his relationship to the goddess.
Yeah.
And if you look closely at his symbology, when he's sitting in his classic yogi pose, the snakes are wrapped around him, the crescent moon's there, the goddess flows the Ganges through his hair down to earth. He is totally unified. And so even though on one hand he needs nothing, on another level, when authentic Shiva energy is inseparable and is ecstatically in love with the goddess. Yeah. Right. So so that and this is why some of the Shiva Shakti lineups astrologically will not manifest as states of sexual or emotional ecstasy, because often they will drop a depth charge into the impurities that block our experience of that sacred, ecstatic love.
Yeah.
So they're highly unpredictable in that respect. Yeah. But if you do get the latter, it comes with, if people are able and actively working the energy, then the gunk can move quickly to open up extraordinary experiences from that deeper expression of the Shiva Shakti within us. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this is, I mean, I have so many questions. I really could ask you questions for hours and hours and hours. But that's the point, actually, of the workshop we're doing at the end of September and beginning of October. So I would love to spend maybe another 5-ish minutes talking, especially I would love to talk about the February lineup, the transits happening in February, because it's unbelievable, and I really want to make sure we touch on that. And then I would love to for you to describe the workshop coming up, because I'm realizing I have so many questions that we could talk for another 3 hours, but I don't have time to do that, and that's the point of the workshop. So does that work for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you mentioned Shiva exactly on the South Node on the 3rd of Feb. It's like, okay, and directly opposite Chiron on the North Node. I love that.
Yes.
From
Can I just contextualize that for 1 second?
Sure,
then you dive in. So just for everybody listening, so we were just saying, that that recently Mars and Venus almost were conjunct in Leo, but they didn't quite meet. And then they will meet on February 22nd, 2024. So about 6 months from now. And actually kind of almost exactly 6 months from now. Yes, right. But right before Venus and Mars meet, the asteroid Shiva will be conjunct the south node of the moon, and Shiva will go retrograde precisely within a few minutes of its conjunction. I mean, it will be precisely on the south node of the moon while it goes retrograde. And then what you discovered, Daniel, is not only that, but on the February 3rd, when Shiva is conjunct the south node, I think that's when this is happening, also Parvati will be exactly squaring the nodes.
Yes.
And then also in the midst of that month, Chiron will conjunct the north node, right? So when Mars and Venus finally come to a conjunction, Shiva will still be on the south node, now going retrograde, I think, and Chiron will be on the north node, exactly. But at the time of the February 3rd, Shiva can precisely conjunct the south node, Parvati will be squaring the nodes. I mean, just can we just focus on the February 3rd? That I love to hear your take. Any of it.
Yeah. Well, in ways, Chiron on the North Node says that part of what's opening there is us stepping towards the healed version of the masculine, the healing version of the masculine. Yeah. But in order to get there, you got to deal with the South Node stuff.
Yes.
And the adjustments that have to happen, with Parvati squaring the nodes. Yeah. Because clearly it's representing a really significant karmic turning point. Yeah. Shiva on the South Node, if you have any significant past life experiences to do with India, sometimes it's very literal. Yeah.
I do. That was my first home, but yes, other than that, literally.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it will show us the imprinting, the psychic emotional residues of however Shiva energy was expressed in our past life history. And in Libra, it's how that Shiva element, positive and negative, impacted our capacity for relationship. Because the South Node, as you know, always shows up a mixture of both difficult and good karmas. Yeah. Right. So, because negative Shiva energy is a lot like negative Pluto energy. There's negative Shiva energy in every dictator, every despot you could name.
Right.
Some of the most vile expressions of the masculine come from destructive Shiva energy.
Yes.
Like, you know, when in some aspects of the mythology, like when he loses his first wife, he blasts everybody involved with fire from his third eye. So you can imagine, you know, how that would be expressed in a movie scene, for instance. It's like, you know, Game of Thrones, dragon energy. Yeah, like he has that destructive capacity. So if indeed that in different incarnations, Shiva energy has acted out like that, then it's time we can face that, work with it, do some deep spiritual and therapeutic work to release the karmic and psychic baggage of that kind of territory.
Beautiful.
So that we can, again, classic South Node, bring in more of the gifts of Shiva, the positive karmas we've generated, whether individually or collectively. Because, you know, given, you know, the destructiveness that the masculine is perpetuating on the planet, you know, and I mean distorted, toxic masculine, that we need more of that high quality, pure Shiva energy to be able to cut through that. Beautiful. And to bring that into this world. And more that happens, the more Chiron is free on the North Node to express more of the healing capacity of the masculine.
Wow.
It's big.
It's huge. Big. Huge. I mean, really huge.
Yeah.
And then bring in Parvati. Maybe you were about to go there anyway.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about that. See, the square between Shiva and Parvati, it echoes with some of their Barneys.
What is that?
Barney, I think that's an Australianism about fights, domestics between Shiva and Parvati. Because when Shiva does something that annoys Parvati, she turns into Kali.
Interesting.
Yeah, and even Shiva gets a bit worried then, as they say. So there's some inherent conflict, and again, that's probably to do with you know, with a cultural or ancestral conflicts between the masculine and feminine. Because, you know, in many ways, Parvati is like Lilith, demands the highest quality of relationship.
Right.
Yeah, and she is the glue of the sacred marriage. And when the masculine hasn't grown up or is in distorted mode, like she gets really, really fierce. Yeah. And so there's something there that needs repairing between the two, archetypally. But as people have said about like squares from the nodes, they're often necessary detours. So Parvati is in Capricorn at the time.
Yeah.
And I forget what else she was conjunct, but it's kind of like, okay, there's healing distorted Shiva energy on the South Node. And then it's okay, how does this impact our capacity to open to the sacred marriage?
Beautiful.
And And the more that work happens, then we can step more towards the North Node.
Right. And I often
And
think, go ahead.
yeah.
Well, I think of as when things are squaring the nodes, I think of them as like almost like they can serve as, well, they can certainly serve as a stepping stone, like a something that an ally that we can, an ally for us as we're trying to integrate the energies of the nodes. But also I can sometimes feel them, and I'm feeling that it with Parvati squaring the nodes in this case as a potential kind of portal, almost like if we drop into ourselves as this Parvati energy in Capricorn, I'm feeling like maybe there's something in her highest essence, or in, like, when I drop into myself as Parvati in that configuration, I feel grief arising too in my body. Like there's something, I mean, I have Parvati conjunct my Venus on my South Node. Okay. So clearly she's a strong archetype for me personally. And then I have Kali conjunct my Mars, which I think is so fascinating, right? But if I just take a very brief moment, just in this moment, to feel what is Parvati, if she's squaring the nodes, I feel her trying to bring something forward. She's trying to say, wait, stop, hang on a second, like we can't skip this step, right? We can't, we want to integrate this Chiron on the North Node and the Shiva on the South Node, but hang on a minute, I have something here. We need me for a moment too. Drop into yourself as me, drop into the world as me, the existence as Parvati, right? So there's something in her, even as a embodied portal. Am I making sense?
Oh, look, my heart's doing all sorts of stuff as you're talking. So it's like, you're onto something. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Like
and I think also,
regardless of what our gender is, right? Even if you identify as a man, this energy of Parvati is you. So what is it that's, keep going. Yeah.
My immediate hit is the grief of the trauma that's been created by the lack of real uniting of the masculine and feminine.
Exactly. Yes.
And I'm also hearing echoes of Mary Magdalene, as I've shared with you, experiential astrology. The inner experience of Mary Magdalene energy is very, very similar, if not the same, as with Parvati.
Wow.
So that longing for that, real mystical union between, the God and Goddess within ourselves, or between Christ and Mary Magdalene within ourselves. It's a necessary stepping stone. I love the way you described that then.
Beautiful. Yeah. Actually, just to say briefly also for people listening is that so you and I are going to be doing this workshop on September 30th/October 1st, depending on where in the world you are. And then a couple weeks later, on each of the days of each of the eclipses, October 14, 15, and October 28, 29, Chris Skidmore, who's also an Australian psychotherapist and astrologer, he and I are going to be doing a set of workshops on the eclipse days on Eros and Psyche with really similar themes. And what he and I we've been just emailing back and forth about what is it that's arising for us in the eclipse energies and the Eros Psyche energies. And we'll be doing a video on this also in a few weeks. But it's also what's coming up for both of us is the grief at the separation between the Mars and the Venus, right? And the Eros and the Psyche, and Psyche not being able to see Eros, and all of this, just so much grief there in both of us, right? Probably in all of us, maybe 99% of humans have this grief. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but it feels so present. And so I just want to name on a practical level that this workshop will happen, and then this set of 2 workshops with Chris will happen, and I think they're going to be beautifully paired. So it's like a deep dive multiple ways of exploring this masculine feminine energy with various wonderful people. So yeah. Is there anything else you want to add about that transit, or anything else before we move on to describing the workshop?
No, as you said, we could go on for hours doing this.
And we will. That's the point of the workshop.
Yeah. Although I have to get a bit more concise and kind of. So let's talk about the workshop. In some ways, what we've just done here is what I'd like to be able to share with people about how to extract this kind of information out of their own birth charts. We'd be looking at Shiva, obviously. We're also looking at Black Moon / Durga, as I've described. The Kali asteroid. Parvati has her own asteroid. And then there's also the transitional figure of Lalita. Lalita is the Indian goddess of sacred sexuality. And she is one of the consorts of Shiva, as I said. She doesn't have her own asteroid, but there are lots of quite beautiful and potent resonances with Hygeia. So we're going to talk about Hygeia, or as a face of Lalita, and vice versa. Because when Hygeia transits visit any part of your chart, there is that twin process of she is an awesome purifier. She was the one who purified the toxic blood of Medusa and made it into a remedy so powerful can bring the dead back to life.
Wow.
Whereas Lalita talks about, that exquisite, pure, sacred, tantric quality of our sexuality. She is very much like a tantric version of Psyche. But whereas Psyche in some ways, or at least started a journey fairly lightweight, like she was fainting a lot, for instance. Whereas Lalita is much more embodied. And there's a joy there, there's an exquisiteness there. And in the experiential astrology, when you're working with Hygeia / Lalita, you'll often have exquisite joinings of the Shiva Shakti column of light in your body. So that's going to be more than enough to talk about in that 3.5 hours. We are going to provide a little experiential taster, particularly around the Hygeia Lalita thing at the end, just so it's not all heady stuff, and hopefully people at home will have an experience of stepping into the energy of that. If we get the time, see, when I'm looking at a birth chart around this territory, and I do have a specific cycles of Shakti reading that I created. I love doing it because I get to go right into this territory. But I look at the natal and the transits and the progressions of those archetypes all interweaving, and that gives a quite extraordinary and multi-layered perception of how we're evolving, whether in that inner Shiva Shakti and how that's going to impact our relating.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get enough time to at least touch on that.
Beautiful. And
Yeah.
and so just on a practical level, this workshop will be a 3.5-hour workshop with a teeny tiny break in the middle. And it will be on September 30th at 3 p.m. Pacific, which is for you October 1st, 11 a.m. No, sorry, 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. Sydney, Melbourne time, right? AES.
Yes.
Yeah. So 6 p.m. for people on the East Coast of the United States, Canada, etc. But it will be recorded. And so those of you in Europe, obviously, if it's the middle of the night for you and you don't want to be there live, you can still join us through the recording anytime in the future. If you're seeing this video after September 30th, October 1st, 2023, this will be available indefinitely. And yeah, and do you want to just say briefly what is the main thing that you hope people will walk away from this workshop with? Like, what's kind of your highest intention for people coming to the workshop?
It's that people can have or develop an astrological handle on their sacred sexuality and its interface with healing and spirituality.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And would you say people need to be versed in astrology to be there, or can it be people who are not very familiar with astrology and just want to understand the archetypes more deeply, or what would you say?
Yeah, at any level of astrological awareness, because I tend to speak more archetypally. Where it gets more astrological, and which I'll really invite people to do, is to offer up questions about the position in their charts. Then we get a bit more technical.
Yeah.
But certainly learning about these archetypes and is part of it. And also, just kind of, as has happened in my own astrological, evolution, sometimes it just needs someone just to open the door.
Yeah.
And that inspires people to go, oh, okay, and then we can talk about resources for extending that.
Absolutely. I mean, that is absolutely part of what's happened for me personally since meeting you and since learning about these to begin with. And yes, it has opened, this conversation has opened so many doors in myself. I can feel it literally opening in me. So I'm really grateful for that. And
before we go, I'd love to mention our India tour, my India tour, which I do each year in September, October, to coincide with Navratri, which is the 9-day goddess celebration, which is an extraordinary time to be in India, because every night, even in the small villages, there's dancing. There's literal dancing in the streets, and it's a tour that's both a deep inner exploration. Like each day we do it, have circles to connect in using experiential astrology, mantras, meditations, chanting with a particular goddess. And then we'll actually go to her local temples. Yeah. So it's both an inner and outer adventure, and it's in a very quiet, rural part of India. So it's a really good intro for people who haven't been there, because we get whisked away from Mumbai airport and we're out in the country in a couple of hours, and we're loved to death by our Indian hosts who've adopted us as family, and so we get to live within the community, and we go onto their farm, and sit in circle under mango trees and really have that traditional experience. And then we go and have these fabulous adventures. So really invite people to think about coming on that tour, because of all my work, it's the one that gives me most joy. Yeah. So that's from the 20th of October to the 4th of November. It's a 15-day event. And you hear it said a lot, but for some people it is a life-changing experience.
I can tell. Yes.
And it's not just a goddess tour, it's actually a Shiva Shakti. And we love it when couples come. We love it when men come. And the more men that come, the better. Because us men, we need more connection.
And I've had a very deep, long conversation. Yeah, I had a long conversation with a man who did go on your tour to India and absolutely loved it and couldn't say enough good things. And yeah.
Yeah. So that's on my website, danielsowelu.com. Love to hear from anybody interested in coming.
And then people can find you through your website. I'll put all of your contact information with this video for sure. And they can connect with you for readings, of course, and you have lots of workshops and other trainings you do, and experiential astrology training you have coming up next February.
Well, can you believe this? I'm starting that very close. Well, it's in the middle of Feb, so in the midst of all that we've spoken about.
Yeah, that's amazing.
The first year of my experiential training, you actually, it's all online, and it's set up in a way that you have 3 imagine. It's actually a whole process of regeneration of your psyche, and we use these deep embodied non-rational, non-interpretive forms of astrological work. And it can change the way you see astrology, the way you experience yourself. And at the end of it is an accredited course. It's the first stage in a practitioner award. So that's coming up in Feb.
Amazing. And I feel like that's even a whole other conversation we can.
Yes. Yeah.
But wonderful. So yes, people can see the link for the workshop here, can see the links for all of your work personally. And any last thing before we end?
You can tell from our conversation, right? We're both deeply into this.
Yes.
And, and it is cutting edge stuff. We're kind of and it adds so much quality and depth and breadth, as a lot of the asteroid goddesses do, to our charts. And fill in the gaps of the planet-only astrology.
Absolutely. And even just as an example, I've done a lot of work with Hygeia, but when you add in this whole set, this whole set of nuances with Hygeia being Lalita, I mean, that's a whole other world, right? So anyway, so much that I feel coming with that workshop, and I'm really looking
forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yep.